So today we're going to be going over how to make the perfect training plan for you and all the principles and variables that go into making that training program. So first of all, we need to understand the basic principles of hypertrophy training and what variables need to be utilized at which point in time, and then we'll obviously be able to construct that program. So first of all, what are we actually doing when we're going to the gym? Now, sometimes obviously that answer is going to be pretty obvious, but it's not just lifting, it's not moving heavy circles. It is trying to create a stimulus that triggers protein synthesis in a target muscle. So stimulus means obviously we're doing something to the body that's causing some kind of outcome, that outcome being protein synthesis, which is basically the making of proteins from amino acids. And we want to do that in just the target muscles that we're targeting that day. So not just trying to create total body, maybe in a full body program, but we do actually care where that stimulus occurs. So what causes that stimulus that drives the protein synthesis? Mechanical tension is the number one thing that has been found via all the studies that actually causes this outcome to occur. And what mechanical tension is essentially how much load and force you can place on an individual fiber in a muscle. So each muscle will have its own basically message of am I accruing protein or not? And that happens all the way down to like a cell level. Other things that can possibly occur to cause this as well is the metabolic stress or the pump, so pushing blood into the muscle and generating lactic acid and things of that nature, as well as muscle damage and fatigue-based mechanisms like calcium buildup and just actual causing damage to the tissue, even though it has been proven to not in itself cause hypertrophy. The things that we do to get there may actually. So it's not completely understood. So we want to make sure that we don't leave these things out just because we think we've found it through science, but we also do want to, follow the science and make sure that we are doing largely what we know works for sure. So not wasting any time. So how do we then get each of those stimuli? So to get to the mechanical tension, it's basically how much physical force is being applied to the muscle. And to do that, we lift heavy weights in the 5 to 12 rep range. Close to failure. Metabolic stress, you need to do enough reps to actually start building up metabolites. That's going to be closer to like 8 plus, more close to 20. So we want to incorporate those, but once again, we want to incorporate the first category at a higher rate because we know that that is what is largely going to be doing the most for our hypertrophy. And muscle damage, things that are going to be a lot heavier, as well as rest pauses and things of that nature. And metabolic stress, doing drop sets, things of that nature can also help get those. So proximity to failure is important for all the stimuli, at least within 3 reps of failure is ideal. And so, we lift heavy weights from a rep range of 5 to 20. Who would have thought it? Not groundbreaking stuff here, but that's understanding how do we break that up. It's not just all 5 to 20, I've got the 6 to 12s here, I've got the 12 to 20s, and we're actually understanding what are they doing and why are we doing them. So that's what we're doing. Now, how do we incorporate that into the structure of a program? So intensity in this reference is going to be used as how close we are to failure, not the percentage of 1 rep max. So, did you have 1 rep in reserve? Did you go to failure? Did you do beyond failure? Partial reps and things of that nature. Frequency being how often you're training an individual muscle. So every second day, is it twice a week? How often do those stimuli occur in those specific tissues? And volume is how many sets is done either per day or per time we stimulate those muscles, or per week can also be a way to quantify it. And the set type, so that volume isn't all equal. I like to equate volume, but a volume of doing 3 sets of 6 reps versus doing 3 sets of 10 reps versus 3 sets of 20 versus 3 sets being a triple drop set are all different amounts of volume as it pertains to the amount of stimulus they will deliver and the amount of fatigue they will accrue, which is largely what we're trying to do here, is get a high amount of stimulus for the lowest amount of fatigue, so we can do it either more in one day or we can do it more often. So number 1 is going to be the relationship between them. The more you do of one, the less you can do of the others. So if you have massive intensity, it means you have to do low volume and less frequency to have that recovery, or you'll go backwards. The high frequency means you've got to do less volume per session, because if you do 10 sets, it's going to be a while before you can do that again. So how do we play with this relationship? Intensity is going to be number 1, whether we don't back down in intensity. No matter what, I don't want you to get more volume, more frequency, more anything. at the reduction of intensity. So intensity is always up as high as it can be, and we're always aiming for failure, as most people will never go to true failure, and so they'll roughly be in 1 to 2 hour out anyway, unless you have like your central nervous system cranked, you're on amphetamines, or you're a person that can just really bring that out of you. 90% of people will just aim for failure, and you're going to land in the rough range anyway, as failure is a kind of variable term here. Now, so we can see in these graphs here basically that this is the reps in reserve, so 0 reps in reserve all the way up here, 0 reps in reserve, it says a 10 rep set. This is the amount of stimulus you'll get, so roughly towards that 6 reps in reserve, you start to get some kind of stimulus, and as you approach 0, you get more and more stimulus, but the cost of that stimulus also comes at more fatigue, and there is a crossover point somewhere around that 1 to 2 where, that extra little bit actually won't be as stimulating as it is fatiguing, which it would be then more beneficial to maybe leave 1 in the tank and do another, and do 4 sets instead of 3. You will get more stimulus for the same amount of fatigue. But as I said, most people will land in 1 to 2 when they think they're actually at true failure. So aim for true failure, go from there. If you start to find that you're getting wrecked way too fast, or you're really feeling your central nervous system, then obviously you actually will back down a little bit. Now, true failure means not grinders to absolute death, but it means the last really decent rep, and not doing the half rep essentially. So effective reps are just the reps that are going to be causing stimulus, because every bit of that set before that was just to get to the point where you're causing stimulus. So if you're in a 7 rep set, it's very quick that you essentially start to get stimulus. Whereas that first, you do 1 rep of a 7 of a weight you could do 7 reps on, you're not really going to get that much stimulus. But you do 4 reps of a weight that you could do 7 of, you're actually already starting to get some kind of stimulus. Now, if you could do 15 of that weight and you do 3, pretty much going to do bugger all. So essentially the first 10 reps are just to get to the point where those reps themselves are effective. So this is obviously not a true science, or perfect science rather. It's just kind of like imagining that, the more reps we do in a set, the more we're doing that are kind of not doing as much as they could be, and it's really the last 5, 3 reps that are actually really doing most of the heavy lifting. Now, if you've ever done any training, you know that doing all the sets in 5 to 8 would be absolutely crazy, which is the most effective. But this is why we sort of build a basis of that, because we know it's the most effective, but then we have to take into account our central nervous system, and also possibly incorporate some of the other types of stimulus, and building a plan based on that. But the core is the 5 to 8, to 10 range, and then we have some other things that are also going to be contributing. So as you become more advanced, the minimum amount of stimulus you need to actually grow increases, meaning that our proximity to failure has to close, or our volume will have to go up, so we'll do more sets to failure. But if we're just talking about intensity here, it just means that we'll have to go more and more and more close to failure. So you may as well start with that, because there's no negative of, say for example, you're at this green line, and that's the amount that you need to accrue a new stimulus, accrue new tissue, create a stimulus. There's no negative to going to here. Yes, there's going to be more fatigue, but at this point you're still in the range where it's actually going to be worth it, all the way up until roughly this point. Now, when you start to become advanced, and you need to cross this threshold in order for that set to become effective, we're starting to get to the point where on a traditional curve it will start to drop off, but you actually need to go there because you're so advanced. Now, most people are going to sit somewhere here, as I said. So, somewhere within that 1 to 2 reps in reserve, but aim for that full failure, and you will obviously land there. Now, second most important is frequency, because what we're trying to do, turn up that muscle protein synthesis, and essentially it is going to be turned up for roughly 72 hours after you apply that stimulus to that muscle over baseline. And the more often you can do it, the higher you keep that the accrual of protein always on. So if you're doing it once a week, you'll turn it on and it'll slowly come down, and then it'll just be doing nothing for half the week, and then you do it again. Versus if you're doing, say, this blue line, which is under this orange line at the beginning, every second day you do it, it starts to slowly fall down, and before it even hits 0, you're actually peaking it again. So it's keeping accruing protein at a high rate often, as long as you can create a stimulus big enough in those days to spike it higher. Now, same with this 3, it's still pretty good, but if you even just go from something every 3 days, every 2 days, This extra little bit of protein accrual over a year's time is actually going to add up to a fair bit of muscle. The only reason that you would ever do less frequent is because you have to do so much volume to actually reach a stimulus that it just takes longer to recover from. So if you can get away with one set of an intense exercise on a body part, and you can do that every second day, ride that out for as long as you can. As soon as you start to not be able to recover from that, or you need more stimulus in order to actually grow, as soon as you go to 2 sets, now maybe you need an extra day in between. So now you can only do it every 3 days, and this is the amount of muscle protein synthesis you're missing out on. But we have to do it as it is required, as the body requires more and more over time. Now, volume is the most debated variable, aka the amount of sets that is done in a session or in a week. Now, there's a minimum amount that we need in order to drive a stimulus, and there's a maximum amount that we can recover from in general. The more advanced you are, the more you need. And the more volume you do in the short term, the more you will grow. But the faster you accumulate fatigue, maybe you need a deload, or the less frequent at which you can apply that stimulus as well. So it's affected by the type of set as well. So you do a 6 rep, or you do a 20 rep. They're going to be different types of fatigue. You're going to be causing metabolic fatigue, you're going to be causing CNS fatigue, and it's just muscular fatigue. So drop sets are less CNS fatiguing, more metabolic. Rest pauses are more fatiguing, but also more stimulatory. Majority of training is going to be straight sets, so that's the average calculation that we're going to do for the amount of sets that are going to be done. You might add on like a drop set here, or an extra 20 rep set here, or a rest pause very rarely. So put it all together. We need 0 to 2 RIR, but push to failure. Do it as frequently as possible. So starting with, say, full body, and just see how you go from there, because most people will get away with one set if you drive it intense enough, especially if it's happening every second day. At the worst case, you could get away with doing 2 sets on a single body part every second day. Try if you can recover from that. Then we're going to move to more of an upper lower, and it might be, say, 4 sets per muscle, 2 to 4 sets per muscle every third day, and that is going to be probably the frequency at which most people are going to be building off. But enough volume to trigger stimulus. So hard as we can, frequently as we can, but making sure that I have enough to accrue a stimulus on that singular day, enough time apart to do it again, so that you recover and actually beat it. The more volume in one day, the more stimulus in the short term, but you require more time to recover. More volume per session to become more advanced. And the base we start at for volume is 1 set per muscle per day, and the maximum would go to is 12. That's just ridiculous. More likely, most people will sit somewhere around 4 to 6. So this is what it will look like in an actual split representation. So full body and then resting every second day means that every single muscle is getting stimulated 3.5 times a week. So keeping that protein synthesis quite high all the time. The next would be an upper lower on anterior posterior 6 times a week. So you go upper lower, upper lower, upper lower, then rest 3 times a week. But that's again quite difficult to recover from. So you have to have less volume on each day because you're not having as much rest, and you're also not resting the entire system. Upper lower rest, upper lower rest, upper lower rest. I'll just go with the upper lower. Anterior posterior is the same thing, but just front back of body instead of upper and lower. But upper lower rest, now it's every third day, so it's 2.5 times a week on 2.3 times a week on average. But you could possibly do a little bit more volume because you got that extra day off, as well as the entire system being a little bit more rested because that entire day is actually having a break. Now, push-pull legs rest, not one that I would massively recommend, as it is quite fatiguing as you're not getting that full rest on the system, but it is dropping down to 2 times a week. Push-pull legs rest, upper lower rest is the same, but you're actually getting that 2 full rest days, which I would recommend a little bit more. And you can apply that volume more and more. Once again, most people are going to be here or above. Anything down lower than here, you are going to be quite advanced, and there's just pretty much no need for most people. Now, general recommendation to start a full body program for a male, then move to an upper lower rest split. You can move to upper lower rest. It's just how often you throw the rest days in, but I wouldn't often do upper lowers without rests until you kind of know that you can recover from that. It's much easier to set volume knowing you're going to have that extra rest day. And after done that, you can move to anterior and move through all these things. So then do funky splits. But for now, that's what I recommend. These are the amount of sets you would start at roughly for those splits. Females are largely the same. They're usually going to be targeting more glutes, so start with a full body rest, but there's going to be more lower on that day. After that, anterior posterior, because you can put more legs and less upper in that split rather than the upper lower. You don't need a full upper day as a female at that stage, and then you can move on to some funky different splits that have got glutes 3 or 4 times a week, as well as upper and all these kinds of shit. So, but that's, once again, if you can understand the principles, you can kind of understand how it's going to work. some recommendations. Now, the example of splits are largely focused on thinking easily. So you need to set the frequency at which you want to train each muscle. You can do more for weaker. So say you do shoulders 3 times a week, but you might only do chest twice and legs twice or whatever. And you've got to decide on which day you do each muscle, and then how long that individual day is going to be, because it is going to be more fatiguing. And if you get towards the end, right, say you're trying to do everything in one day, and you're doing 3 sets of 2 exercises, by the time you get halfway through that, the exercise is going to be redundant because you have a battery that essentially you can use for the entire day. And once that's drained, every set after that is just not going to be effective anymore. So it doesn't matter if you're trying to it's roughly like somewhere around, 10 to 15 sets is probably going to be ideal per day, unless you're doing some kind of low full body ones where you can get it to a little bit more because it's spread so evenly. But in general, somewhere around 10 to 20. Anything more than 20 sets in a day, and you're going to be pretty redundant towards those end ones. All right, now exercise selection. Now you've got basically where you want your volume and everything like that. What exercises do you put in and why? So the variables of which we're going to be playing with is an isolation or compound. What's the exercise resistance curve? Harder in the contracted or harder in the lengthened? What's the muscle strength curve versus that? The insertion and the origin of the muscle, making sure that you're moving through a full range of motion. The portion of muscles of the fibers targeted within that muscle, is it upper or lower, of the pec or anything like that. The ability to create internal stimulus, so like how good can you apply an internal stimulus versus just pushing weight with that certain exercise, as well as the stability. And you're out here and it's moving, trying to do it, or you're locked in and it's just this muscle moving essentially. So you obviously want some of those variables often, other of the variables not often. These are the whole portions of basically what you'll be training as a bodybuilder essentially. And within those, you then have the consideration of isolation, compound, and then lengthened, mid, or contracted variations. And then obviously just making sure that they're stable, making sure that they're this and that. So these are the actual variations you want to have. Some of the other considerations are just, you always want it to be stable as possible. And you always want it to be internally stimulating as possible, but these are the ones you actually want to move around and through. For example, if we take the chest, you've got you can load it in the lengthened position, load it heavier in the mid, load it heavier in the contracted, and you can do that for each of the portions of upper, middle, and lower. And in each of those, you're going to have some kind of different exercise that's going to target that. There's 24 different variations, so there's absolutely no reason that you do 2 flat presses that are loaded in the mid-range on the same body day. You should do, ideally, it's something like an upper and a lower one day, then a middle and an upper one day, then a middle and a lower another day. So you've got 2 of each throughout the entire week. If you've got say 3 different days, ones you might have 2 flies, you might have 2 that are loaded, which are going to be largely loaded in the contracted / middle. Then you're going to have at least 2 or 3 that are loaded in the lengthened, which is going to be most advantageous in general due to the science and everything, and then some that are loaded in the middle. So you do want to largely load it in the lengthened as much as possible for hypertrophy, but you do also want to include everything else, some kind of contracted position, just to make sure that you're getting everything out of it and you're not just making things redundant. So mostly lengthened positions for everything, some contracted, some mid. I can't go into those specifics because it's going to take way too damn long. We'll basically just be building a program from scratch. But if you have any questions, reach out or leave a comment, and I will answer them. And hopefully you can start making some programs that are actually going to slap and get your results. So thanks for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.